2 billion people currently wear a symbol around their necks without knowing what it actually is. 6,000 men were nailed to wooden crosses along 120 miles of highway, one every 100 feet, left to rot for months while travellers covered their faces from the smell. Right now, that same symbol hangs in hospitals, courtrooms and schools across the Western world. The Roman general who ordered this massacre was celebrated as a hero and given a triumph. And the church doesn't want you asking what that symbol meant before they claimed it, because for 500 years it meant one thing: we own your body, your death, and your soul. I'm Percival Blackwood, and welcome to the Rabbit Hole Chronicles. Today we're stripping away 2,000 years of conditioning to see the most recognisable symbol in human history for what it actually was. Let me be clear, this isn't an attack on Christianity. This is about understanding how symbols work, how power works, and how the Romans engineered suffering with scientific precision. Because what they did with the cross makes modern horror films look tame. The Appian Way, 71 BCE. After crushing Spartacus's slave revolt, Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus ordered every captured rebel crucified along the entire stretch from Capua to Rome, 6,000 men. One cross every 100 feet for 120 miles. The bodies weren't removed, they were left to decompose for months. One of the busiest roads in the empire became a corridor of rotting corpses. That's the logistics of it. 6,000 wooden crosses erected, 6,000 men dying simultaneously over days, and Crassus left them there as a message written in human flesh. This is what happens when you challenge Rome. You might think this was extreme. Fellow tunnellers, the Appian Way wasn't an aberration, it was policy scaled up. The Romans engaged in crucifixion systematically for 5 centuries. And they didn't invent it, they stole it from their enemies and perfected it. The practice likely started with the Assyrians and Babylonians impaling enemies on stakes. The Persians were first to use it as state policy. King Darius I crucified 3,000 political enemies in Babylon. But the Romans learned it from the Carthaginians during the Punic Wars. Hannibal crucified hundreds of Roman prisoners. Instead of being horrified, the Romans thought, that's brilliant. And they refined it, systematized it, turned it into an art form of suffering. Here's what you need to understand about Roman law. The empire was built on rigid hierarchy. At the top, Roman citizens, especially elites. At the bottom, slaves, foreigners, and conquered peoples. The law reflected this absolutely. The Romans called it supplicium servile, the slave's punishment, reserved for those at the absolute bottom. To crucify a Roman citizen was considered an abomination, not because of the pain, but because of the status degradation. Cicero railed against crucifying citizens, calling it the most cruel and disgusting punishment. But notice what he's upset about. Not the cruelty itself, but that this punishment designed for slaves might be applied to someone with legal status. Citizens got beheaded. Quick, relatively dignified. The cross was for everyone else. So who ended up crucified? Slaves, for basically any offence. Non-citizens in subjugated provinces. Enemies of the state. Rebels, brigands, pirates, deserters. The list of capital crimes reveals what Rome actually protected. Piracy threatened trade. Brigandage threatened roads. Rebellion threatened security. Magic threatened the emperor's life. Even consulting astrologers about an emperor could get you crucified. These weren't crimes of passion. They were crimes against imperial infrastructure. Crucifixion wasn't primarily about punishment. It was deterrence, psychological warfare. Let me walk you through what actually happened, because the process was designed to maximize every form of suffering. It started with verberatio, scourging, mandatory, except for women, senators, and soldiers. The victim was stripped naked, tied to a post, and beaten with a flagellum. Not a normal whip, a short, heavy whip, with multiple leather strips embedded with small iron balls and sharp bone fragments. The iron balls caused deep bruising. The bone fragments cut through skin and tissue into skeletal muscle, leaving the victim's back in what sources described as quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh. Many went into shock, some died before reaching the cross. If you survived, you carried the patibulum, the horizontal crossbeam, to the execution site. About 100 pounds on your lacerated shoulders. The full cross was modular. The vertical stake was already there, a permanent fixture since wood was scarce. You supplied your own crossbeam. A Roman guard detail led you through the streets. A herald carried a titulus, announcing your crime. All along the route, bystanders mocked you, spat on you. This was part of the spectacle. At the execution site, always the most public location, major roads, crossroads, hilltops, you were stripped naked again. The nakedness was crucial. In the ancient world, public nudity meant profound social degradation. Then came the affixing. And here's a common misconception: you weren't nailed through the palms. That's Renaissance art. The flesh of the palm can't support body weight. Instead, the nail went through the wrist, specifically through Destote's space in the carpal bones. This placement is engineering and torture in perfect harmony. Structurally sound, but the nail presses on the median nerve, sending excruciating pain up the arms into the brain. Every movement compressed that nerve. Your feet were nailed through the heel bone. Archaeological evidence confirms this, sometimes one foot on top of the other, sometimes one on each side. Now here's the question that's haunted researchers. How did crucifixion actually kill you? For decades, the prevailing theory was asphyxiation. In the hanging position with arms outstretched, you couldn't breathe properly. To take a breath, you'd push up on your nailed feet, causing unbearable agony, gasp air, then slump back. Eventually, exhaustion made it impossible to push up, and you'd suffocate. This explained crurifragium, breaking the legs. With broken legs, you couldn't push up to breathe, so you'd die quickly. But recent forensic pathology challenges this. Death was likely multifactorial, a cascade of failures. The damage began at the whipping post. Severe scourging caused massive blood loss, putting victims in pre-shock before they reached the cross. Then, dehydration, acidosis from muscle cramps, sepsis from open wounds, cardiac arrhythmia, heart failure. Ancient sources never describe breathing difficulty. They describe victims surviving for days, which contradicts simple suffocation. The cause wasn't one thing. Your body was being destroyed from multiple angles until something critical failed. Timeline varied wildly. Some died in hours, others lasted days. It depended on the scourging severity, the victim's health, whether nailed or tied. And here's something that will haunt you. Romans sometimes provided a small wooden ledge called a sedile. Sounds merciful. It supported body weight, but the purpose was prolonging agony. By preventing immediate death, it kept you alive longer. Some accounts describe a pointed seat that impaled the groin. The Romans were engineering suffering with precision. But even death didn't end it. Roman law dictated that bodies stayed on the cross until they fully decomposed or were consumed by animals. In a culture where proper burial was essential for peace in the afterlife, this denial was metaphysical violence. The message wasn't just, "we will kill you." It was, "we will annihilate you, erase you from the living and the dead, damn your spirit." This made crucifixion the summum supplicium, the supreme penalty, total destruction. Now, is there proof beyond ancient texts? Physical evidence? Yes, but incredibly rare. Despite tens of thousands of crucifixions throughout the empire, we have only 2 confirmed archaeological examples. The rarity tells us something. First, many victims were tied with ropes. No bone trace. Second, nails were valuable iron, removed after death for reuse. Third, most victims were denied burial, so remained scattered. To find evidence requires a perfect storm. Nailed victim, nails left in body by accident, proper burial given. This happened twice. In 1968, Jerusalem. Archaeologists discovered an ossuary inscribed Yehohanan, son of Haggakol. Inside, a heel bone with an 11.5 centimetre iron nail driven through it. A fragment of olive wood preserved between nail head and bone, a piece of the cross itself. The nail's tip was bent, probably from hitting a wood knot. That's why it couldn't be extracted. That's why we have this evidence, because of a random knot 2,000 years ago. Both legs showed brutal fractures. Confirmation of Crucifixion. Yehohanan was likely a Jewish political dissident, executed in the 1st century CE. In 2017, Fenstanton, England. Another skeleton with a nail through the heel, likely an enslaved man in his late 20s, executed between 130 and 360 CE. What's significant, this wasn't Judea, a rebellious province. This was Britain, the empire's edge. It proves crucifixion was standard punishment for slaves and prisoners across the entire Roman world. These finds confirm the texts, but remind us of the scope we can't see. For every nail stuck in bone, thousands didn't. For every body buried, countless others rotted. Jerusalem, 70 CE. The city's under siege. Roman General Titus is crushing the Jewish revolt. Every day his soldiers capture defenders. Every day they crucify them in sight of the city walls. Eyewitness historian Flavius Josephus writes, "The soldiers, out of rage and hatred, amused themselves by nailing them in different positions. So great was the number that space could not be found for the crosses nor crosses for the bodies. They ran out of wood before victims. Soldiers experimented with positions, treating human beings like art projects in suffering. 500 per day at one point." Josephus recognised 3 acquaintances among the crucified and begged Titus to save them. They were removed, but 2 still died. 1 survived, proof that if removed quickly, recovery was possible. But most weren't removed. Most stayed until they died, then long after, as warnings to watchers on the walls. This was crucifixion as tactical terror, using prisoner suffering to break the besieged city's morale. Throughout Roman history, occasional voices criticised the practice. But notice what they criticised: not the cruelty itself, but the crudeness, the lowness. Crucifixion was so shameful that respectable writers referred to it euphemistically or not at all. Cicero said the word crux should be fear removed, not only from a Roman citizen's body, but from his mind, eyes and ears. The word itself was polluting. Seneca described different execution methods. I see crosses there, not just of one kind, but made in many different ways. Some have their victims with head down, some impale their private parts, others stretch out their arms. The Romans were inventively cruel. The cross could be T-shaped, cross-shaped, X-shaped, or just a simple stake. Method varied by location, materials, executioner mood. No standard protocol beyond make it public and horrible. This was normal. For 5 centuries, travellers throughout the Mediterranean regularly saw human beings dying on crosses. It was infrastructure policy, how empire worked. Then something extraordinary happened. 4th century CE. Emperor Constantine the Great, the first Christian emperor, abolished crucifixion throughout the Roman Empire. This is often framed as humanitarian reform, but that's inaccurate. Constantine didn't end brutal capital punishment. He replaced crucifixion with hanging people still died, just not by crucifixion. The reason was theological and political, not humanitarian. Constantine's new state religion centred on a figure who endured the supplicium servile. It became untenable for Rome to continue using the central symbol of its faith as its most shameful punishment for slaves and traitors. The cross had to be retired from torture service so it could be elevated as salvation. And here's where we arrive at the most profound inversion in human history. For the Romans, the cross was the ultimate symbol of defeat, humiliation, state power over individuals. It represented the boundary between citizen and non-citizen, human and non-human, where law ended and terror began. 2,000 years later, it's the most recognisable symbol on earth, meaning almost the exact opposite. Hope, sacrifice, redemption, divine love. The earliest known depiction of Jesus' crucifixion is graffiti scratched into a Roman wall, 2nd century CE, the Alexamenos graffito. It shows a man with a donkey's head on a cross, another figure raising his hand in worship. The inscription, Alexamenos worships his god. It's mockery, designed to humiliate a Christian, by reminding them they worship someone who died the death of a slave, a criminal, the lowest of the low. That's how Romans saw it. Venerating a crucified man was degrading, subversive, idiotic. It violated every Roman understanding of honour and power. Yet within centuries, that symbol conquered the empire that created it. The infelix lignum, unfortunate wood, of the executioner became the signum of imperial power and Western civilization. So here's what I want you to think about, tunnellers. When you see a cross today, in a church, on a chain, tattooed on someone's arm, what are you actually looking at? A symbol of faith? Or the most successful rebranding in human history? The cross was designed as a weapon to terrify conquered peoples and maintain social hierarchy through spectacular violence. It worked. It kept slaves in line, crushed rebellions, made the Pax Romana possible. Then, through what believers call providence and historians call cultural evolution, it was transformed. The ultimate symbol of imperial power became the ultimate symbol of resistance to that power. The mark of shame became the mark of salvation. But to understand what that transformation means, to grasp the radical nature of early Christianity, you first have to see the cross as the Romans did. The Appian Way massacre wasn't an aberration. It was policy. Roman citizens lived entire lives in a world where public torture was a normal landscape feature. The general who ordered 6,000 men crucified was celebrated, rewarded. He wasn't a monster in his society. He was doing his job. That's the world where this symbol was claimed. When Constantine abolished crucifixion in the 4th century, he didn't do it because Romans realised it was wrong. He did it because the symbol had been captured by a different ideology. You can't maintain state terror when your victims transformed your weapon into their banner. The cross stopped being effective as terror the moment it became hope. That might be the most subversive thing that's ever happened in human history. I'm Percival Blackwood. Thanks for going down this tunnel. I know it was dark, but sometimes the most important stories are the ones we'd rather not hear. Until next time, keep questioning, keep digging. And remember, symbols only have the power we give them. The cross meant one thing for 5 centuries, then it meant something else. What will it mean 5 centuries from now?